Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be really unpacking strategies.
Yeah.
Not the kind you use to pick a winning fantasy football team or anything,
Right.
but the kind that win wars.
The real deal.
The real deal.
Yeah.
Our primary source is Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War.
Mm-hmm.
You've also included some supporting texts from Sun Tzu and Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yeah, those are great additions.
So this deep dive is going to be like a crash course in the art of war with historical examples, psychological insights,
Yeah.
and maybe even some aha moments about your own personal battles.
Yeah. And what's so fascinating about Greene's approach, I think, is that he doesn't just talk about military tactics.
Yeah.
He really digs into the psychology of warfare.
Right.
Showing how these ancient strategies are still relevant today because they tap into those fundamental human behaviors
Yeah.
that haven't changed in thousands of years.
I'm ready to have my mind blown.
Yeah.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's define what we're talking about here. What exactly is strategy?
Oh.
And how does it differ from tactics?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
You've probably been in situations where you were so focused on putting out fires that you lost sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
That's the difference between tactics and strategy.
Okay.
Tactics are the immediate actions you take to deal with the situation, while strategy is the overarching plan,
Okay.
the long-term vision.
Okay, so tactics are like fighting individual battles, while strategy is about winning the entire war.
Yes, and the word strategy actually comes from the ancient Greek word strategos,
Oh, okay.
meaning leader of the army.
Interesting.
In ancient Greece, a strategos wasn't just a fighter.
Right.
They were a leader who had to think ahead,
Yeah.
anticipate their opponent's moves,
Wow.
and orchestrate the entire war effort,
So like a general.
like a general.
Okay.
Think Alexander the Great conquering the Persian Empire.
Right, right.
Huge undertaking.
Makes sense. Now, I've heard that good strategy sometimes involves using your enemy's strengths against them. How does that work?
Well, Greene illustrates this idea using the Greek myth of Athena versus Ares.
Okay.
Ares represents brute force, while Athena, the goddess of wisdom, represents strategic thinking.
Okay.
Greene argues that, like Athena, we should aim to outsmart our opponents,
Yeah.
to use their own aggression and momentum against them.
That's so cool. It's like mental judo.
Exactly.
But how do you practically do that? Do you have any real-world examples?
Take Margaret Thatcher, for example.
Okay.
Greene argues that she thrived on having enemies.
Wow.
Throughout her political career, she defined herself in opposition to those she disagreed with,
Interesting.
whether it was the Argentinians during the Falklands War,
Right.
or even those she considered too moderate within her own party.
Oh, wow. So even within her own party.
Yeah, even within her own party.
That's interesting.
By clearly defining who her enemies were, she rallied her supporters and projected an image of strength.
That's fascinating. It makes you think about the role of conflict in our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever noticed how going through a tough challenge or even having a rival can actually make you stronger and more focused?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive, but sometimes having an opponent can actually help you
Yeah.
by giving you something to push against.
So enemies aren't always a bad thing.
Not necessarily.
It's more about how you frame the conflict and what you learn from it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now let's dive into some specific strategies from Greene's book.
Right.
Strategy, #2, is called Do Not Fight the Last War, the guerrilla war of the mind strategy.
Oh, wow. That's a mouthful.
It is.
What do you think that means? Well, it sounds like it's about letting go of the past and being adaptable, right?
Mhm.
Like, don't get stuck in old patterns of thinking or cling to strategies that worked before but might not be relevant now.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Greene argues that we often sabotage ourselves by holding on to outdated methods and mindsets. He uses the metaphor of guerrilla warfare to describe the mental battle we need to wage against our own ingrained habits and assumptions.
That's such a powerful metaphor.
It is.
So how do we practically wage guerrilla warfare on our own minds?
It starts with self-awareness.
Yeah.
Pay attention to your thoughts and behaviors.
Right.
Are you constantly replaying past mistakes?
Oh, yeah.
Are you afraid to try new things? Once you identify those self-limiting patterns, you can start to challenge them.
And it's not just about letting go of the past, right?
Right.
It's also about being adaptable to the ever-changing circumstances of the present moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that ties into strategy, #3. Amidst the turmoil of events, do not lose your presence of mind. the counterbalance strategy.
Okay.
Essentially, it's about developing the mental toughness to stay calm and focused, even when everything around you feels chaotic.
Okay, I think I need some help with this one.
Yeah,
I'm not exactly known for my calmness under pressure.
right.
Any tips on how to cultivate that general Patton level of composure?
Well, Green uses General Patton as an example of someone who actively worked to overcome his fears and develop mental toughness.
Okay.
For example, he had a debilitating fear of water.
Oh, wow.
So he deliberately forced himself to swim and even joined the rowing team.
So it's about facing your fears head on, pushing past your comfort zone to build resilience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember what Nietzsche said. Against war,
Yeah.
it can be said, it makes the victor stupid, the defeated malicious, in favor of war. Through producing these two effects, it barbarizes and therefore makes more natural. It is the winter or hibernation time of culture. Mankind emerges from it stronger for good and evil.
That's a lot to unpack. I think we'll need to save that for our next session.
Agreed. It seems like you're already starting to see the world through a more strategic lens.
A little bit, yeah.
Just a little bit.
It's exciting.
It is.
I like it.
Me too. So picking up where we left off, let's dive a little deeper into that Nietzsche quote. Against war, it can be said, it makes the victor stupid, the defeated malicious eloquent, in favor of war. Through producing these two effects, it barbarizes and therefore makes more natural. It is the winter or hibernation time of culture. Mankind emerges from it stronger for good and evil. What stands out to you about that?
Well, it's definitely a provocative statement. It seems to suggest that conflict, even if unpleasant, can be a catalyst for growth and change, both individually and collectively. But it also highlights the potential negative consequences of conflict, the potential for both the victor and the vanquished to become hardened and less civilized.
Exactly. Nietzsche's acknowledging that conflict is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It can lead to progress and innovation,
Right.
but it can also bring out the worst in humanity.
And that's why it's so important to approach conflict strategically, right?
Yeah.
To be mindful of the potential consequences and to choose your battles wisely.
Precisely. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about strategy. #4 create a sense of urgency and desperation. The death ground strategy. What do you think Green means by death ground?
Well, it sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
It makes me think of those moments where you have no choice but to fight, where your back is against the wall and you have to give it your all.
You're on the right track. Green argues that we often waste precious time and energy dreaming about the future
Yeah.
instead of fully engaging in the present moment.
Yeah.
He suggests that by putting ourselves in death ground situations
Okay.
where the stakes are high and there's no room for error,
Right.
we can tap into a hidden reserve of focused determination and creativity.
Oh.
Think about Lyndon B. Johnson's decision to run for Congress in 1937.
Oh, yeah.
He was young and inexperienced,
Yeah.
but he saw it as a now or never opportunity.
That was a bold move.
It was.
And it paid off right.
It did.
He ended up winning that election.
He did. And it was a classic example of how putting yourself in a high-pressure situation can force you to rise to the occasion. Have you ever had a similar experience?
Oh, absolutely. Just last year, I was offered a new job that was way outside my comfort zone.
Wow.
I was terrified to take it,
Yeah.
but I knew that if I didn't, I would always regret it.
That's the spirit of the death ground strategy.
It is.
It's about embracing challenges, pushing past your fears, and creating those moments of do or die that force you to tap into your full potential.
So it's not about literally being in a life or death situation,
Not necessarily.
but about cultivating that sense of urgency, that feeling that you have nothing to lose.
Exactly. And it's not just about external pressure. It's also about finding that internal drive, that burning desire to achieve something meaningful. Remember our discussion about Ted Williams using negative press as fuel for his performance?
Oh, yeah.
It's the same principle. By turning criticism and challenges into motivation, you can tap into a powerful source of energy and drive.
That's so inspiring.
Right.
It makes me want to go out and conquer the world.
I love it.
But let's be real.
It does.
Not every battle can be won.
Right.
Sometimes retreat is the wisest course of action. How can we know when it's time to step back?
That's a crucial question. Retreating doesn't mean giving up. It means recognizing when a particular battle is not worth fighting.
Right.
When it's more strategic to conserve your energy and resources for another day. Think about Robert the Bruce,
Okay.
who led Scotland in its fight for independence from England.
Yeah.
He was often outnumbered and outmaneuvered by the English,
Oh, wow.
but he knew how to use retreat to his advantage.
Yeah.
He would avoid direct confrontations,
Smart.
drawing the English deeper into Scotland's rugged terrain where they would become exhausted and demoralized.
So he was essentially turning his weakness into a strength.
Precisely. He was playing the long game, using strategic retreat to wear down his opponent and ultimately achieve victory.
Right.
Have you ever been in a situation where you had to step back, even though it felt counterintuitive?
Oh, definitely. In my previous job, I was in a really toxic work environment. I tried everything I could to make it work,
Yeah.
but it just kept getting worse.
Yeah.
Eventually, I realized that the best thing for me was to leave, even though it felt like admitting defeat at the time.
And that was a strategic decision, right?
It was.
You recognized that staying in that environment was only going to drain your energy and prevent you from achieving your goals.
Exactly. Sometimes you have to let go of a battle in order to win the war.
And that brings us to strategy. Hashtag 14, overwhelm resistance with speed and suddenness. The Blitzkrieg strategy.
Ah, the Blitzkrieg. I've always been fascinated by that. It's like the ultimate display of military power and precision.
It is a powerful strategy.
Yeah.
The Blitzkrieg is about using speed, surprise, and overwhelming force to disrupt your opponent's plans and seize the initiative. Think about Napoleon's rapid march to Berlin in 1806.
Oh, wow.
He caught the Prussians completely off guard,
Yeah.
and they were unable to adapt to his swift and decisive movements.
That's incredible. It's like the mental equivalent of a shock and awe campaign.
It is.
But how can we apply the principles of the Blitzkrieg to our everyday lives? I mean, I'm not planning to invade any countries anytime soon.
Well, think about it this way. Have you ever procrastinated on a project until the last minute,
Oh, yeah.
then suddenly found yourself working with incredible focus and efficiency to meet the deadline?
Oh, all the time. It's like my brain suddenly kicks into overdrive.
That's a mini Blitzkrieg. You're using a concentrated burst of energy and focus to achieve a specific objective. And it's a strategy that can be applied to all sorts of challenges, from launching a new business to writing a book to even cleaning your house.
I love that. So it's not just about speed, right?
Right.
It's also about decisiveness, about taking action and not letting fear or doubt hold you back.
Exactly. The Blitzkrieg is about momentum, about striking while the iron is hot, and about not giving your opponent time to regroup or counterattack.
Okay, so we've got retreat Blitzkrieg. It's like a whole arsenal of strategic tools. But how do we know which tool to use when?
That's where the art of strategy comes in. It's about assessing the situation,
Yeah.
understanding the strengths and weaknesses of both yourself and your opponent,
Yeah.
and then choosing the approach that is most likely to succeed. And sometimes that involves a bit of deception.
Ooh, intrigue. I knew there had to be some trickery involved.
Ah.
Tell me more about this deception business.
Remember, strategy, hashtag 23,
Oh, okay.
we've a seamless blend of fact and fiction. Misperception strategies.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about controlling the narrative shaping perceptions
Yeah.
and ultimately leading your opponent astray.
So it's like creating a smokescreen,
Mhm.
making them see what you want them to see.
Exactly. And a brilliant example of this is Operation Fortitude South, a massive deception operation carried out during World War II.
Oh, wow.
The Allies created an elaborate network of fake armies, dummy equipment, and misleading radio transmissions to convince the Germans that the D-Day landings would take place at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy.
And it worked.
They were.
The Germans were completely fooled.
It was a masterclass in deception and a reminder that sometimes the most effective strategy is the one that your opponent doesn't see coming.
This is blowing my mind. It makes you wonder how much of what we perceive as reality is actually shaped by deliberate manipulation and deception.
That's a great question. And it's one that we'll delve into further when we discuss the inner front strategy,
Okay.
which is all about attacking your opponent from within, using psychological warfare to weaken their resolve and ultimately break their spirit. But for now, let's move on to another fascinating strategy that I think you'll appreciate. Strategy, hashtag 24. Take the line of least expectation. The ordinary, extraordinary strategy.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's this one all about?
This strategy is all about the element of surprise. It's about subverting expectations, doing the unexpected, and catching your opponent off guard.
Okay.
Think about Hannibal's tactics at the Battle of Trebia. He knew the Romans were expecting a conventional battle, so he did something completely unexpected. He sent his brother Mago with a detachment of cavalry to hide in a nearby ravine. Then, as the Roman army advanced, Mago's cavalry suddenly attacked from the rear, throwing the Romans into chaos and paving the way for a Carthaginian victory.
Wow, that's brilliant. It's like a sneak attack on a strategic level.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not just about surprise attacks. It's about doing the unexpected in any context. For example, if you're in a business negotiation, you might make an unexpected concession to throw your opponent off balance. Or if you're an artist, you might use an unconventional medium or technique to capture people's attention.
I'm starting to see how all these strategies well developed for warfare can be applied to all sorts of challenges in our lives.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of Green's work.
Yeah.
He takes these ancient principles and shows how they're still relevant in the modern world.
Okay, I'm hooked. But before we get too carried away with these strategies,
Right.
let's take a step back and talk about the ethics of it all.
Sure.
Some of these strategies, like deception and the annihilation strategy, can be pretty ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure we're using these strategies for good and not for manipulation or harm?
That's an excellent point, and it's one that we'll address in more detail in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into the darker side of strategy. The tactics that are often used by those who are more interested in power and domination than in fairness and cooperation. We'll also discuss how to recognize those tactics and how to protect yourself from them.
Okay, I'm a little nervous, but also really excited to unpack the darker side of strategy. I'm ready to face the shadows.
I love it.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the power of mental flexibility to the art of strategic retreat.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's time to face the shadows. What about the strategies that aren't so noble? The ones that people use to gain an advantage, even if it means bending the rules a little.
Well, in the realm of strategy, there's always a fine line between using your wit and resorting to more manipulative tactics.
So where do we draw that line?
Yeah.
How do we differentiate between a clever maneuver and a downright dirty trick?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it's one that has been debated by philosophers and military strategists for centuries.
Well, let's try to unpack it. What are some examples of those darker strategies that people use to gain an advantage?
Let's start with strategy. Hashtag 1010. Create a threatening presence. Deterrent strategies. It's about cultivating a reputation that makes people think twice before messing with you.
So it's about projecting an aura of power, even if you don't necessarily have the brute strength to back it up.
Exactly. Think of it like a psychological barrier.
Okay.
If your opponents are never quite sure what you're capable of, they'll be less likely to risk provoking you.
So it's like that old saying, it's better to be feared than loved.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. It's more about cultivating a healthy respect, a sense that you're not someone to be trifled with.
Got it. So how do you project that aura of power without becoming a bully?
It's a delicate balance. You need to set boundaries, like assert yourself when necessary, but also choose your battles wisely. It's about being strategic with your intimidation.
Okay, so it's about using your presence strategically, not necessarily about being aggressive or confrontational.
Precisely. And remember, this strategy can be especially effective for those who are often underestimated. It's about flipping the script and making people recognize that you're not someone to be taken advantage of.
That's empowering. But let's be real. Sometimes even the most intimidating presence isn't enough to deter a truly determined opponent. What happens then?
That's where strategy, hashtag 15, comes in. Control the dynamic. Forcing strategies.
Okay, what's that all about?
This strategy is about subtly manipulating your opponent's behavior, pushing their emotional buttons, and ultimately getting them to act in ways that benefit you.
Ooh, that sounds a little sneaky. Is it ethical?
That depends on your intentions and how you use it. It's about understanding human psychology, recognizing those subconscious triggers that influence people's actions.
So it's a Jedi mind trick.
Well, maybe not that dramatic, but it is about using subtle cues, carefully chosen words, and even your body language to steer the interaction in your favor.
Can you give me a concrete example?
Think about Mae West,
Oh, yeah.
the legendary Hollywood actress. She was a master of controlling the dynamic. When she signed with Paramount Pictures, she was determined to have creative control over her films. But she knew the studio executives wouldn't just hand it to her.
So what did she do?
She used a combination of charm, wit, and strategic maneuvering to get her way. She played the role of the seductive blonde bombshell, but she also made demands, rewrote her lines, and insisted on specific camera angles. By the time studio realized what she was doing, it was too late. She had already taken control.
That's amazing. She used their own expectations against them.
Exactly. And it's a strategy that can be applied to any negotiation or interaction where there's a power imbalance. The key is to understand the other person's motivations and to use that knowledge to subtly guide their behavior.
This is fascinating, but it also makes me wonder how we can protect ourselves from being manipulated in this way.
That's a great question. And it all comes down to self-awareness. The more you understand your own emotional triggers and the tactics that people might use to exploit them, the better equipped you'll be to resist manipulation.
Okay, so it's about knowing yourself as well as knowing your opponent.
Exactly. Now let's move on to a strategy that I know you've been curious about. Strategy. Hashtag 29 penetrate their minds. The inner front strategy.
Yes, this one sounds particularly intriguing and maybe a little terrifying.
It can be a powerful and dangerous strategy. It's about attacking your opponent from within, using psychological warfare propaganda and disinformation to weaken their resolve and sow discord among their ranks.
So it's like a mind game.
Yes, and it's a strategy that has been used effectively throughout history, from ancient Rome to the Cold War.
What are some examples of how this strategy is used today?
Well, think about the way social media is being used to spread misinformation and propaganda, or the way that political campaigns use targeted messaging to manipulate voters' emotions. It's all about infiltrating people's minds and shaping their perceptions.
That's pretty scary. How can we protect ourselves from this kind of psychological manipulation?
The key is to be a critical thinker. Don't just accept everything you read or hear. Question the source of information. Consider the motives of the person or organization spreading it, and be aware of your own biases. The more you understand how your own mind works, the less susceptible you'll be to manipulation.
So it's about developing a healthy skepticism and being discerning about the information we consume.
Exactly. And it's also about cultivating a strong sense of self, knowing your own values, and not being easily swayed by the opinions of others.
This is all incredibly insightful. It's like you've given me a whole new toolkit for navigating the world with more awareness and strategy.
And remember, these strategies are just tools. It's up to you to decide how you use them.
Well, I'm definitely feeling more empowered and equipped to face whatever challenges come my way. Thank you for taking me on this deep dive. It's been an incredible journey.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, the study of strategy is a lifelong pursuit. There's always more to learn and new challenges to face. So stay curious, stay engaged, and keep honing your strategic skills. You never know when you might need them.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. If you've enjoyed exploring the world of strategy with us, we encourage you to check out Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War for a deeper dive into the tactics and principles we've discussed today. Until next time, keep strategizing and remember to always choose your battles wisely.